The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 months. Maya rolled over and hit the snooze button with more force than necessary. Her tiny apartment was cold and the heating bill sat on her kitchen table, marked with a bright red final notice stamp. She dragged herself out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom. The mirror showed tired eyes and messy hair, but Maya had learned to work with what she had. A quick shower, some concealer under her eyes, and her long black hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked presentable enough for another long day ahead. Maya's closet was small but organized. On one side hung her work uniforms, black pants, white shirts, and comfortable shoes that could handle 12-hour shifts. On the other side were her good clothes, the ones she wore to auditions and music classes. Those hung there like distant dreams, waiting for their turn to matter. The bus ride to downtown took 40 minutes, and Maya used every second to review her music theory notes. Her phone battery was dying, but she couldn't afford to replace it yet. Everything seemed to be about money these days. Rent, groceries, textbooks, bus fare. It all added up faster than her paycheck could cover it. Romano's Italian restaurant sat on 5th Street, right in the heart of the business district. The building was old but elegant, with large windows that let in the morning light. Maya had worked there for 8 months now, ever since she moved to the city to pursue her music degree. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills. Mostly. The morning shift meant setting up tables, polishing silverware, and preparing for the lunch crowd. Maya worked alongside Carlos, an older man who had been at Romano's for 15 years. He spoke broken English mixed with Spanish, but he had a kind heart and always shared his homemade tamales during their breaks. "You look tired, mija," Carlos said as they folded napkins together. "You staying up late with those books again?" Maya nodded. She had been up until 2 a.m. studying for her harmony exam. Music theory was harder than she expected when she first enrolled at the conservatory. All those years of singing in church and school choirs hadn't prepared her for the technical side of music education. "My professor says I need to understand the math behind the music," Maya explained. "It's not enough to just have a good voice anymore," Carlos shook his head. "Music should come from the heart, not from numbers on a page." He wasn't wrong, but Maya knew she needed both. The competition was fierce at school. Most of her classmates came from wealthy families who could afford private voice lessons since childhood. They spoke casually about summer programs in Europe and master classes with famous singers. Maya felt like she was always playing catch-up. The lunch rush started at 11:30 a.m. Romano's attracted business people, tourists, and locals who wanted good Italian food and a nice atmosphere. Maya had learned to read customers quickly. The business crowd wanted fast, efficient service. The tourists liked to chat about the city. The regular customers had their preferences memorized. Mrs. Henderson came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordering the chicken parmesan and asking about Maya's studies. She was a retired music teacher who understood the struggles of a young musician trying to make it in the world. "How are your voice lessons going, dear?" Mrs. Henderson asked as Maya poured her usual iced tea. "Good days and bad days," Maya replied honestly. "My instructor says I have natural talent, but I need more training to compete at a professional level." "That's the truth about music," Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Talent will get you started, but hard work will get you where you want to go." Maya appreciated the encouragement, but sometimes she wondered if hard work would be enough. Her bank account was almost empty again, and tuition for next semester was due in 6 weeks. She had applied for every scholarship she could find, but most required performances or auditions that conflicted with her work schedule. The afternoon brought different challenges. Maya had to leave early for her voice lesson, which meant losing hours of pay, but missing lessons wasn't an option either. She had already postponed her degree by 1 year to save money, and falling behind academically would make everything worse. Professor Williams was strict, but fair. He pushed Maya harder than her other instructors because he saw something special in her voice. Today's lesson focused on breath control and diction, 2 areas where Maya still struggled compared to her classmates who had years of formal training. "Your voice has real power," Professor Williams told her as they worked through a challenging piece. "But power without control is just noise. You need to learn to shape every note, every word with intention." Maya practiced the same phrase over and over until her throat felt raw. She knew her professor was right, but progress felt slow. Sometimes she sang in the shower at home and imagined performing on real stages. with real audiences who chose to listen instead of just tolerating background music. After her lesson, Maya rushed back to Romano's for the evening shift. This was when the restaurant really came alive. Dim lights, soft music, and the smell of garlic and fresh herbs created an atmosphere that made people linger over their meals. Tips were better in the evening, which Maya desperately needed. The evening crowd was different too. More couples on dates, families celebrating special occasions, and groups of friends catching up over wine and pasta. Maya enjoyed these customers more because they seemed happier, more relaxed. Their good moods were contagious, and that made the long hours more bearable, but tonight felt different. There was tension in the air that Maya couldn't quite identify. The other servers seemed nervous, and Mr. Romano himself kept checking the reservation book and looking toward the front door. Maya wondered if they were expecting someone important, maybe a food critic or a celebrity. As closing time approached, Maya counted her tips and tried to calculate whether she could afford groceries this week. The math wasn't encouraging. She would have to choose between fresh vegetables and the music textbook she needed for next month's classes. Again. Walking to the bus stop, Maya passed a small theater that displayed posters for upcoming shows. She stopped to read about a local opera company's season. The lead roles were filled by singers with impressive credentials and long lists of previous performances. Maya wondered if she would ever see her name on a poster like that. The bus ride home gave her time to think about her choices. She could quit school and work full-time, saving money but giving up on her dreams. She could take out more student loans, but debt scared her. Or she could keep doing what she was doing, working herself to exhaustion while trying to balance everything at once. By the time Maya reached her apartment, she had decided to keep pushing forward. Tomorrow would bring another early morning, another long day of serving food and studying music. But it would also bring her one day closer to graduation, one step closer to the life she really wanted. She set her alarm for 5:30 a.m. and tried not to think about how tired she already felt. Dreams were worth fighting for, even when the fight felt impossible to win. Friday evening at Romano's was always busy, but tonight felt different. Maya noticed it the moment she walked through the employee entrance. The kitchen staff was moving with extra urgency, and Mr. Romano was personally inspecting every table setting. Even the flowers looked fresher than usual. "Big reservation tonight," Carlos whispered as they set up the dining room. "Some rich guy with connections to the mayor. Boss wants everything perfect." Maya nodded and continued her prep work, but she could feel the nervous energy spreading through the restaurant. The other servers kept checking their appearance in the bathroom mirror, and the kitchen crew was being extra careful with every dish that went out. At exactly 7:30 p.m., a black luxury car pulled up outside. Maya watched through the window as a chauffeur opened the door for a tall man in an expensive suit. Even from across the room, she could see the confidence in his walk, the kind that comes from never being told no. Richard Blackstone entered Romano's like he owned the place. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His suit probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months, and his watch caught the light every time he gestured. Behind him walked a much younger woman in a designer dress, followed by 2 men who looked like business associates. "Table for Blackstone," he announced to the hostess, not bothering with pleasantries like please or thank you. I called ahead. "I assume you have my usual spot ready?" The hostess, normally calm and professional, seemed flustered. "Of course, Mr. Blackstone, right this way, sir." Maya had heard about Richard Blackstone from other servers. He was a real estate developer who owned half the buildings downtown. Rich, powerful, and according to the stories, not very nice to the people who served him. Maya hoped she wouldn't be assigned to his table, but luck wasn't on her side tonight. "Maya, you're taking table 12, the floor manager announced. "It's the Blackstone party. Be extra careful, they're important customers." Maya's stomach tightened, but she nodded. Important customers meant good tips, and she needed every dollar she could get. She grabbed menus and water glasses, took a deep breath, and walked toward table 12. The table was in the restaurant's prime location, near the window with a view of the city lights. Blackstone sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. His wife, or girlfriend, Maya couldn't tell, sat quietly beside him, barely speaking. The business associates flanked them, both looking slightly uncomfortable. "Good evening," Maya said with her brightest smile. "Welcome to Romano's. I'm Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Blackstone looked up from his phone with obvious irritation. Finally. Do you have any idea how long we've been sitting here? Maya glanced at her watch. They had been seated for exactly 3 minutes. I apologize for any delay, sir. Can I start you off with some water and tell you about tonight's specials? Water should already be on the table, Blackstone snapped. And I don't need to hear about specials. I know what I want. Maya poured water for everyone, noting how Blackstone's wife mouthed thank you silently while her husband continued scrolling through his phone. The business associates studied their menus intently, probably trying to avoid eye contact with their host. The lobster risotto, Blackstone declared without looking up. And make sure it's not overcooked like last time. Your kitchen seems to have trouble with simple instructions. Maya made notes carefully. Certainly, sir. And for everyone else? The ordering process was painful. Blackstone interrupted every time someone spoke, changed his mind twice about wine selections, and complained about the bread before it even arrived. Maya maintained her professional smile, but her jaw was starting to ache from the effort. This bread is cold, Blackstone announced loudly, holding up a piece like evidence in a trial. How long has it been sitting around? Don't you people understand that bread should be warm? I'll get you fresh bread right away, sir, Maya replied, reaching for the basket. Don't bother, Blackstone waved her away. The damage is already done. This is exactly why I usually go to Luigi's downtown. They understand how to treat their customers properly. Maya wondered why he came to Romano's if he preferred Luigi's, but she kept that thought to herself. She hurried to the kitchen to place their order and get fresh bread, hoping the rest of the evening would go more smoothly. It didn't. Blackstone found fault with everything. The appetizers were too small. The wine was served at the wrong temperature. The lighting was too dim. The music was too loud. Maya made trip after trip to the kitchen and back, trying to address each complaint while maintaining service for her other tables. The other diners were starting to notice. Maya caught concerned glances from regular customers who had seen her work professional and cheerfully for months. Mrs. Henderson, having dinner with her husband tonight, looked particularly worried every time she saw Maya rushing past their table. I don't understand how places like this stay in business, Blackstone announced to his table, but loud enough for nearby diners to hear. The service is amateur, the food is mediocre, and the staff clearly doesn't understand what hospitality means. Maya felt her cheeks burning as she approached with their main courses. She had been working in restaurants for 2 years and had never received complaints like this before. Other customers always complimented her service, and Mr. Romano had never had to speak to her about performance issues. Your lobster risotto, sir, Maya said, setting the plate down carefully. Blackstone took one bite and shook his head dramatically. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Overcooked, underseasoned, and frankly insulting for what you're charging. Maya looked at the dish. It looked perfect to her. The chef had been extra careful with Blackstone's order. But she knew better than to argue with a customer, especially one who seemed determined to find problems. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare something else for you, sir? At this point, I don't trust your kitchen to make a simple salad correctly, Blackstone replied. This whole experience has been a disaster from start to finish. The business associates looked embarrassed, picking at their food in silence. Blackstone's wife stared out the window, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. Maya felt sorry for all of them, but especially for the woman who had to sit through this performance regularly. As the evening wore on, Blackstone's behavior got worse instead of better. He snapped his fingers to get Maya's attention, criticized the restaurant loudly enough for other tables to hear, and made increasingly personal comments about the service. I suppose this is what happens when restaurants hire people who don't have proper training, he said during dessert. Maybe if you spent less time on whatever it is you do in your spare time and more time learning your job, your customers wouldn't have to suffer through evenings like this. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she cleared plates, but she kept her voice steady. I'm sorry your experience wasn't satisfactory, sir. Is there anything else I can get for you tonight? Just the check, Blackstone said dismissively. And maybe some advice for your manager about hiring standards. Maya brought the check, hoping this nightmare would finally end. But Blackstone had one more surprise waiting. As he signed the credit card receipt, he made sure Maya could see that he had left no tip at all. Maybe this will teach you to take your job more seriously, he said. handing her the receipt with a smug smile. Maya stared at the 0 written in the tip line. After 3 hours of abuse and running back and forth to accommodate his every complaint, she would earn nothing extra for her efforts. Worse, she would have to tip out the busser and bartender based on the total bill, meaning she would actually lose money serving this table. The other diners had been watching the entire scene unfold. Maya could feel their eyes on her as Blackstone's party finally prepared to leave. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed embarrassed to have witnessed such behavior. But everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Maya stood there holding the receipt, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. All her dreams of performing on stage, of using her voice to move people and create something beautiful seemed impossibly far away. Right now, she was just a waitress who couldn't even earn a tip from her most difficult customer. Blackstone stood up from the table, but he wasn't done with Maya yet. Something about her quiet dignity seemed to irritate him even more than poor service would have. Maybe it was the way she maintained her professionalism despite his constant criticism. Or maybe he just enjoyed having power over someone who couldn't fight back. "You know what your problem is?" Blackstone said, his voice carrying across the now quiet dining room. Other conversations had stopped as people turned to watch the scene unfolding. "You think you're better than this job?" Maya looked up from the receipt she was still holding. "I'm sorry, sir. Don't play dumb with me," Blackstone continued, warming to his subject. "I can tell by the way you carry yourself. You think this is temporary, don't you? You think something better is coming along?" Maya didn't respond, but her silence seemed to encourage him. The restaurant had grown completely quiet now, with even the kitchen staff peering out to see what was happening. "Let me give you some free advice, sweetheart," Blackstone said, his tone dripping with fake concern. "This is it. This is your life. The sooner you accept that, the better you'll be at your job." The business associates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even they seemed to realize that Blackstone had crossed a line. His wife was staring at her hands, apparently fascinated by her perfectly manicured nails. Maya felt something rising in her chest. Not anger exactly, but something deeper. All the exhaustion from double shifts, all the stress about money and school, all the time she had swallowed her pride to keep customers happy. It was all bubbling up at once. "I'm actually a student," Maya said quietly. "I'm studying music." Blackstone's eyes lit up like he had just been handed ammunition. "Music? Oh, this is rich. Let me guess, you're going to be a famous singer, right? You're just waiting tables until your big break comes along." A few people in the restaurant winced at his tone. Mrs. Henderson half rose from her seat, as if she wanted to intervene, but her husband gently pulled her back down. "Tell me," Blackstone continued, now addressing the entire room as much as Maya, "what makes you think you're special enough to make it in music? Do you have any idea how many deluded kids come to this city thinking they're going to be stars?" Maya's face was burning with embarrassment, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm working hard to improve. I'm taking lessons and studying theory and theory." Blackstone laughed out loud. "You mean you're paying someone to teach you how to sing? That's like paying someone to teach you how to breathe. Either you have it or you don't, and honey, if you're working here at your age, you clearly don't have it." The cruelty in his voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't just about bad service or cold bread. This was about power, about making someone smaller to make himself feel bigger. "I bet you can't even sing," Blackstone declared, looking around the room as if seeking approval from an audience. "I bet you've never performed anywhere except maybe some school talent show." "Am I right?" Maya's throat felt tight, but she managed to speak. "I've performed at school recitals and—" "School recitals don't count," Blackstone interrupted. "Those are just participation trophies for kids who can't handle real competition. I'm talking about professional venues, paying audiences, people who actually choose to listen instead of being forced to sit through amateur hour." The words hit their target. Maya had never performed professionally, and the reminder stung. Every audition she had attended was filled with singers who had years of professional experience, connections in the industry, and confidence that came from success. "Here's what I think," Blackstone said, standing up and putting on his coat with theatrical slowness. "I think you're living in a fantasy world. I think you're wasting money you can't afford on a dream that will never happen. And I think the kindest thing anyone could do is help you face reality." Maya wanted to disappear. She wanted to run to the back room and hide until everyone forgot about this humiliation. But her feet seemed frozen to the floor. "You want to know why I didn't tip you?" Blackstone asked, his voice rising. Because mediocre service deserves mediocre rewards, and mediocre people deserve mediocre lives. You should thank me for being honest with you. Mr. Romano appeared at Maya's shoulder, his face tight with controlled anger. Sir, I think it's time for you to leave. Oh, I'm leaving, Blackstone replied. But not before I finish making my point. This girl needs to understand something important. He turned back to Maya, his expression almost pitying now, which somehow felt worse than his anger. Music is for people with talent, connections, and most importantly, money. You don't have any of those things. You're a waitress from nowhere with no resources and no realistic shot at success. The music industry will chew you up and spit you out, and you'll end up right back here serving food to your betters and wondering where your life went wrong. The restaurant was completely silent now. Even the background music seemed to have stopped. Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. So here's my advice, Blackstone continued, pulling on his gloves with deliberate precision. Stop pretending. Stop wasting everyone's time, including your own. Accept who you are and what you're capable of. Not everyone gets to live their dreams, and that's okay. The world needs waitresses too. With that, he turned toward the door, expecting his party to follow. His wife finally looked up, her eyes meeting Maya's for just a moment. In that brief glance, Maya saw something that might have been an apology, or maybe just recognition of shared humiliation. The business associates followed silently, clearly eager to escape the scene their host had created. But Blackstone paused at the door for one final blow. Oh, and one more thing, he called back to Maya. If you really think you can sing, why don't you prove it? Right here, right now. Let's see what all that expensive education has taught you. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Every person in the restaurant was looking at Maya, waiting to see what she would do. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few seemed to reflect the same cruel anticipation that gleamed in Blackstone's eyes. Maya stood frozen, the unsigned receipt still trembling in her hand. This was her worst nightmare and her greatest opportunity all at once. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed about herself, was about to be tested in front of a room full of strangers by a man who had already decided she would fail. The seconds stretched out like hours as Maya realized that whatever happened next would change. Everything. Maya looked around the restaurant at all the faces staring back at her. Some showed pity, others embarrassment for what they had witnessed. A few seemed genuinely curious about what she might do next, but it was Mrs. Henderson's encouraging nod that gave Maya the push she needed. All right, Maya said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll sing. Blackstone's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He had clearly expected her to back down, to slink away in defeat. The fact that she was accepting his challenge seemed to catch him off guard. But he recovered quickly. This should be entertaining, he said, settling back against the doorframe like he was preparing to watch a train wreck. By all means, give us a show. Maya set down the receipt and smoothed her work apron. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely think straight. She had never performed outside of a classroom or practice room. The idea of singing in front of a restaurant full of strangers terrified her. But something deeper than fear was driving her now. All those years of dreaming, all those hours of practice, all the sacrifices she had made to pursue her education, they had led to this moment. If she walked away now, she would always wonder what might have happened if she had been brave enough to try. Maya walked slowly toward the small piano that sat in the corner of the restaurant. It was mostly decorative, used occasionally for quiet background music during special events. She had noticed it many times during her shifts, but never imagined she would be the one playing it. The piano bench was covered with a layer of dust. Maya wiped it clean with a napkin and sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. The instrument was older than the ones she was used to at school, but it was properly tuned and maintained. Well, Blackstone called from across the room. We don't have all night. Maya ignored him and tried to calm her racing thoughts. What should she sing? Something simple and safe, or something that would really show her training? Her professor had always told her to choose pieces that highlighted her strengths, but right now she could barely remember what those were. Then she thought about the song that had first made her fall in love with music. She was 12 years old, sitting in the back of her church while the choir director sang a solo that made everyone in the congregation stop and listen. The melody was beautiful but simple, The lyrics spoke of hope and perseverance, and the emotion behind it was something Maya had never forgotten. Ave Maria, Maya announced to the room, the Schubert version. She heard a few murmurs of recognition from the audience. This wasn't a pop song or something casual. It was a piece that required real skill and training. Maya was either very confident or very foolish to attempt it in front of strangers. Maya placed her fingers on the keys and began the opening notes. The melody was gentle at first, almost whispered, giving her time to find her center and remember her breathing techniques. Professor Williams had drilled these fundamentals into her until they became second nature. The first words came out softly, tentatively. Maya's voice was naturally powerful, but she had learned to control that power, to use it deliberately instead of just releasing it. The Latin words felt familiar on her tongue after months of practice and study. As she moved through the first verse, Maya began to forget about the restaurant around her. The piece demanded her full attention. Every phrase had to be shaped carefully, every note placed with precision. This was what she had been training for, what all those late nights of study were supposed to prepare her for. The audience was completely silent now. Even Blackstone had stopped smirking and was listening with what might have been actual attention. Maya could sense the change in the room's energy, but she didn't dare look up from the piano keys. The song built gradually, as Schubert had intended. What started as a gentle prayer became something more urgent, more personal. Maya let her voice grow stronger, supported by the breath control techniques she had practiced until they hurt. Her professor's voice echoed in her memory. Power without control is just noise. But this wasn't noise. This was music in its purest form. Human emotion transformed into sound. Trained technique serving something larger than itself. Maya felt the familiar rush that came when everything clicked into place, when years of preparation suddenly made sense. The high notes came naturally now, floating above the piano's accompaniment without strain or effort. Maya had worried about these passages during practice sessions, but tonight they felt effortless. Her voice filled the restaurant's corners, reaching every table and carrying clearly despite the room's acoustic challenges. She was completely lost in the music now, unaware of anything except the interplay between voice and piano, the rise and fall of the melody, the way the Latin words shaped themselves around the notes Schubert had written 2 centuries ago. This was why she had come to the city, why she worked double shifts and survived on pasta and hope. The climax of the piece approached, the moment where everything she had learned would either support her or leave her exposed. Maya took a deep breath and committed fully to the phrase, her voice soaring with controlled power that made the restaurant's wine glasses sing in sympathy. As the final notes faded away, Maya let her hands rest on the keys for a moment before looking up. The silence in the room was different now, not the uncomfortable quiet of conflict, but the hushed reverence that follows something beautiful. Then the applause began. It started with Mrs. Henderson, who was wiping tears from her eyes and spread quickly through the restaurant. Diners who had been trying to ignore the confrontation were now standing, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen and were adding their appreciation. Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaking slightly from adrenaline. She had done it. She had actually performed in front of strangers, and they had responded with more warmth than she had ever experienced in a classroom. But the person she most wanted to see was Blackstone. He was still standing by the door, no longer smirking but not applauding either. His expression was unreadable, surprise maybe, or possibly grudging respect. For the first time all evening he seemed at a loss for words. That was adequate, he finally said, though his tone lacked the venom it had carried earlier. I suppose your teachers have managed to drill some basic technique into you. It wasn't an apology or an admission that he had been wrong, but coming from Blackstone it was probably the closest thing to praise Maya would get, and honestly she didn't need his approval anymore. The response from everyone else in the room had told her everything she needed to know. Mr. Romano approached the piano with tears in his eyes. Maya, in 8 months of working here, you never told me you could sing like that. I wasn't ready, Maya replied, still catching her breath. I didn't think I was good enough. Good enough? Mrs. Henderson had made her way over as well. Honey, that was absolutely beautiful. You have a gift. Other diners were approaching now, offering congratulations and asking where she had trained. Maya felt overwhelmed by the attention, but in the best possible way. These weren't fellow students or Professors who were required to be encouraging. These were regular people who had been moved by her music. Blackstone watched this scene unfold with what might have been frustration. His attempt to humiliate Maya had backfired completely, turning her into the evening's hero instead of its victim. Without another word, he pushed through the restaurant's front door and disappeared into the night, his party trailing behind him. Maya barely noticed him leave. She was surrounded by people who wanted to hear her story, to understand how someone so young could sing with such maturity and skill. For the first time since moving to the city, Maya felt like she belonged somewhere. The evening had started as her worst nightmare, but had become something she would remember for the rest of her life. As the applause died down and diners began returning to their tables, Maya found herself surrounded by people she had served for months but never really talked to. Mrs. Henderson was the first to approach, her eyes still bright with unshed tears. "My dear," she said, taking Maya's hands in hers. "I taught music for 37 years, and I can tell you that what you just did was extraordinary. Not just the technical skill, though that was impressive, but the emotion you brought to that piece. That can't be taught." Maya felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the restaurant's heating. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means so much coming from you." Other customers began sharing their own reactions. A businessman who Maya had always assumed was too busy to notice her service stopped to say, "I've seen performances at Lincoln Center that weren't half as moving as what you just did." An elderly couple who came in every anniversary told her she had made their evening unforgettable. But it was the woman sitting alone at table 6 who surprised Maya the most. She had been dining quietly by herself, occasionally glancing up from her tablet to listen to the confrontation with Blackstone. Now she approached Maya with a business card in her hand. "I'm Dr. Patricia Reeves," she said, extending the card. "I'm the artistic director for the Metropolitan Youth Opera Company." Maya's eyes widened as she read the card. She had heard of the company. They were one of the most respected training programs in the city, known for launching young singers into professional careers. "I was here having a working dinner when your performance began," Dr. Reeves continued with a slight smile. "I have to say, what you did took incredible courage. But more than that, you demonstrated real artistry under pressure. That's something we look for in our program." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she held the business card. I'm not sure I understand." "We're always looking for promising young singers, especially those who can combine technical training with genuine emotional connection. Would you be interested in auditioning for our summer intensive program?" Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. The Metro Youth Opera was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been dreaming about, but never thought she could access. Their alumni regularly went on to major opera houses and concert halls around the world. "Yes," Maya said, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Yes, I would be very interested." Dr. Reeves smiled. "Excellent. Call my office next week and we'll set something up." "And Maya?" She paused, glancing toward the door where Blackstone had made his exit. "Don't ever let anyone convince you that dreams are impractical. The world needs beautiful things, and you have something beautiful to offer." As Dr. Reeves returned to her table, Maya stood holding the business card like it might disappear if she let go. Mr. Romano appeared at her elbow, beaming with pride. "Maya, I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have stopped that man's behavior much sooner. No employee should have to endure what you went through tonight." "It's okay," Maya replied, and she meant it. "If he hadn't pushed me, I never would have sung. I never would have met Dr. Reeves." Mr. Romano shook his head in amazement. "You know, my grandmother always said that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. I never really believed it until tonight." Carlos emerged from the kitchen, his face glowing with excitement. "Mija, you made everyone cry happy tears. Even Tony back there was wiping his eyes, and he's been cooking for 20 years. The rest of Maya's shift passed in a blur of congratulations and conversations. Regular customers who had never talked to her about anything beyond their food orders were suddenly interested in her story, her education, her dreams for the future. Tips that night were triple what she usually earned, with several customers specifically mentioning how moved they had been by her performance. Mrs. Henderson left last, stopping at the hostess station where Maya was helping with closing duties. "I want you to remember something," the older woman said seriously. "That man tonight tried to make you smaller, to convince you that your dreams were foolish. But you proved him wrong with every note you sang. Don't ever forget how that felt. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying. And one more thing, Mrs. Henderson added with a conspiratorial whisper. I happen to know that Blackstone's wife is filing for divorce. Apparently, tonight wasn't the first time he's embarrassed her in public. Sometimes bullies get exactly what they deserve. After the restaurant closed, Maya sat alone at the piano, running her fingers over the keys that had changed everything. Just hours ago, she had been counting tips and worrying about grocery money. Now she had a business card from one of the city's most prestigious music programs and more encouragement than she had received in months of classes. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate. How was work? You're home late. Maya stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that your worst night became your best night? That a man's cruelty had accidentally revealed your courage? Instead of texting back, Maya called. Her roommate answered on the first ring. You're not going to believe what happened tonight, Maya began, and then told the whole story from beginning to end. When she finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Maya, her roommate said finally, you realize what this means, right? This is your big break. This is the thing you've been working toward. Maya looked around the empty restaurant, at the piano that had become her stage, at the tables where people had listened to her sing with tears in their eyes. I know, she said quietly. I think it finally happened. The next morning, Maya woke up without her alarm. For the first time in months, she felt rested despite having worked a full shift. The business card was sitting on her nightstand where she had placed it the night before, proof that the previous evening hadn't been a dream. She called Dr. Reeves's office as soon as it opened. The audition was scheduled for the following Thursday, Maya's day off from the restaurant. She spent the week preparing, choosing pieces that showcased her range and working with Professor Williams to polish her technique. I heard about what happened at Romano's, Professor Williams said during their lesson. The entire music department is talking about it. You've become something of a legend, Maya blushed. I just did what felt right in the moment. That's exactly why it worked, her professor replied. You stopped thinking about technique and started thinking about communication. That's the difference between a student and an artist. The audition went better than Maya had dared to hope. Dr. Reeves and the other panel members listened attentively as she performed pieces ranging from classical art songs to contemporary musical theater. When she finished, Dr. Reeves smiled and said, We'll be in touch very soon. That call came 2 days later. Maya had been accepted into the summer intensive program with a partial scholarship. The opportunity would provide her with advanced training, performance experience, and connections in the professional music world. But perhaps more importantly, it gave her something she had been missing: confidence. The girl who had been afraid to sing in front of strangers had become a young woman who knew her voice had power, who understood that dreams backed by hard work and courage weren't foolish at all. Maya never saw Richard Blackstone again, though she heard through Mrs. Henderson that his wife had indeed filed for divorce, citing public humiliation among other complaints. Maya felt no satisfaction in his troubles. She was too busy focusing on her own bright future. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the doorways to our greatest opportunities. Maya's story proved that when we face our fears with authenticity and courage, we might just discover that we're capable of more than we ever imagined.